However, the Western system is somewhat the same. You see, they're all under this kind of theocracy, be it the Christianized, versions, Judeo-Christianized versions of the West, or this Brahmanistic, Hinduistic tradition. You study back a bit, and you'll find that, the religions of the East and the West were much more pure. And in fact, they've gone through many periods where they've actually been contaminated. They fall into the hands of very manipulative people right across the board. But getting more to the metaphysical point you're asking, no, I think that the ego is something we need to have in right context. You don't want to karate kick it to death. It's needed. The ego is very much needed. It's almost like the janitor of a large corporation. But he turns on the lights, or, he turns them off at night, he keeps the security, he cleans the floors, The ego is there for a reason. It's not something we need to get rid of, but it must be correctly assimilated. And its job description must be a little bit more defined, And it's almost like the janitor may think of himself as the lord of the corporation at night when the executives aren't there. But when the executives drive up in the morning, he damn well knows his place. And in psychological terms, that's the same thing. When the self, or the spirit of a man, is reintegrated, well, then the ego will do its job, and it'll be well thanked as well. I'm a person who believes that the ego has done a monumental job of keeping consciousness intact. And I've gone into this in my Atlantis book, you see, and other works on the trauma. I believe in ancient times there was a deep traumata that happened to the human psyche, and the ego took birth from this. Not too many thinkers have ever gone into this, but there is elements of the work of Julian Jaynes, you see, that looks into this, that in a very recent period, somewhere between 10 and 13,000 years ago, the earth itself was wrecked by titanic cataclysms. And it's the effect of those that intrigues me, which is the effect on consciousness. This has never been touched on by anyone with the depth that it requires. Man's psyche, what we know as ego consciousness or consciousness, went through an enormous tribulation because of that physical trauma that happened on Earth, be it through comets, so everybody's got their own theory, and be it through disasters and all this kind of thing. And the fossil record tells us that this happened. The Michael Cremos and Graham Hancocks, they all know that this happened. Even mainstream scientists admit that it's happened. And new evidence is always coming out all the time proving that it happened. Recently now in Siberia, new mythologies have been uncovered, texts that confirm that those areas were once called the lands of the dead, the lands of the abyss, inhabited by specters and ghouls and stuff. And this is a completely common motif you find all over the Nordic countries and Britain, which was at one time not based in romantic ideas. This was their way of describing the carnage and the fossil death, and the enormous fauna mortality. And I pick up with this and go, yeah, but okay, if you believe that, Atlantis and these pre-Diluvian continents were sinking beneath the earth and cataclysms reigned and all of these horrors took place, and as I said, science can now prove that they did, why has nobody ever asked? I mean, man wasn't just sitting in some chair like King Canute letting this all happen in a passive way like he was watching a screen. You go back to the ancient legends of the Indians and the Native Americans and any group, and they're telling you about how the consciousness of man was utterly devastated by this. This is where we have the invention of the devil being a sort of way of interpreting, these natural disasters, the fire demons, the hollow places, the frightening animals, the hybrid creatures, the journey into the underworld, the war between the gods. Something happened in the consciousness of man that can pretty much be dated. And then as I continued researching, I discovered that basically what we are calling the ego today, meaning the kind of consciousness you have when you wake up every morning, has a date of birth. It hasn't been with us eternally. That ties into my work on 2012, where I say, and it might not be with us in the future too, right? But even leaving that aside, its date of birth, I believe, backed up strongly by the work of the great Julian Jaynes, emphasizes that this ego is new, recent. This helps to account for some of the ego's peculiar infantile traits. Well, it is infantile. Expect from a child childish behavior. So all the peculiarities and peccadillos and weird idiosyncrasies that the ego has could be explained by the fact that it's basically about 7 years old at this point, Incredibly efficient, incredibly open, in many ways, but at the same time, utterly ruthless and tyrannical, like children are. And then, what the hell has this got to do with conspiracy, Michael? People will say, well, in my work, finally I started to realize that as you study this particular history, the history of psychology, the history of history, my God, what would happen if man being in this traumatized state, if man is a schizoid creature, Could not a particular oligarchical power or plutocratic elite that's hell-bent on controlling man, as is obvious to anybody who's done 5 minutes of homework, and we can leave the definitions of who they are, royals, Illuminati, Jesuits, Jews, whatever, let's just leave that aside for one moment because that's a whole separate study. If you can understand that there's an architecture or matrix of control, could their control not be occurring because they're already dealing with a schizoid individual who has no center of sovereignty, meaning that his understanding of truth, his understanding of justice, his understanding of personal freedom, and his understanding of security are all fundamentally shaken to the core? Could that creature then be susceptible, you see, to this kind of control? As I studied more, I came to the conclusion that that was the case, absolutely. And therefore, it's not just about some Orwellian jackboot in the face, guns to the head, which of course they can still do and are doing in many places of the world. They're not above it. But they, architects of control, have far more subtle ways of gaining, human beings' complicity, the regimentation, and the conformity, and all of this. They want what's known. I think it was Eric Fromm who said, "Smiling depressives." What Aldous Huxley said is a tyranny without tears. You see, they're already whistleblowing this. A lot of people, a lot of the insiders are always saying, "We prefer this. We prefer the remote-controlled creature, as opposed to somebody who's told where to go, told where to sit." We've done that. That's kind of Mark 1 of the slave. We want to have, 2.0, slave 2.0. We want global village. And that's a different kind of slavery. I've also described it, as I did here at the conference, as being chains of gold replace chains of iron. An affluent society, an affluent prison, a decorated incarceration replaces a dungeon. And the danger of that is that this psychically mutilated person goes, "This is wonderful, thanks, great. Hail the village, hail the global village, praise the overlords," you see. So they'll have actually a completely willing slave. In other words, the smiling depressive. Well, people's vision of themselves is connecting to everything we've been saying. This is where the real tyranny lies. Tyranny is ultimately psychic in nature. As we said, it has a physical, component. The colonization, the police state, the CCTV cameras, the digital implants. We're not negating any of this, and this has been well covered by myself and many other, scholars in this field. What distinguishes my work right now, at least, and I'm hoping catches on a lot more, is this idea of how man is his own tyranny, how he identifies with these masters, how he has a hierarchy within his own consciousness. And to put it simply, it's this vision of oneself. I describe people as self-murdered or self-hating. In psychological terminology, it's sadomasochistic or sadistic types, masochistic types. And if you're masochistic, you inevitably become tyrannical and sadistic to other people. But it's rooted in the idea that your vision of yourself is not really a vision of yourself at all. It's a vision of what philosophers like George Frederick Hegel would have called the social persona. Of course, he advocated it too. He was all too itching for this. But in many ways, however, he was quite right. And Sigmund Freud's work also showed this, that the neurosis in people, the psychosis in people, the dysfunction in people, and therefore in their relationships and in society, is based on the fact that man doesn't even have a sense of self. And the ego that he's working with is also not personal. It's a social ego defined by all the people around you. We modify our sense of self and our ego identity based on the approval ratings of other people. And we do this unconsciously, we're not even aware of it. Mother wants this, father wants that, I won't get along with these friends of mine at school unless I modify my behavior. Part of this is natural and part of it's needed, but at the same time it goes too far. And it's what we know basically is conformity. And as I said, it's okay up to a point, because it's called ego acculturation. You're meant to do this, you're meant to acculturate to your society. However, there's a dividing line between a natural expression of this and when it becomes so extreme that now it starts to erode your sense of natural selfhood. In perfect societies, if they ever existed, but in the perfect society, you'd be allowed to do this, but it would be because it would help your selfhood enter into the world, and the society would allow you to express actually your selfhood. In the imperfect society which we have now, is to erase the selfhood. And Hegel was the kind of person who emphasized this a lot. And I would underline what he's saying by saying, say I ask what you do. You go, well, I drive a taxi. I'm a bus driver. I'm a builder. I'm an architect. you know, or I'm a housewife, or I'm a shopkeeper, you know, I'm a street cleaner, or I'm a painter. Everything that you would say of yourself, 10,000, 100, 1,000 other people will say exactly that. There's many taxi drivers, right? There's many window cleaners, there's many politicians, there's many philanthropists, whatever you want to call it, deep sea divers, you name it. Just in the same way, go, oh, my name's Michael. Well, that's hardly unique, is it? So this is what I'm talking about. You start to realize that, wait a minute, almost everything that defines me, or I think defines me, is absolutely collective. That's why Big Brother's rubbing his hands going, yes, it is, and that's very important that it is. But then I say, that's okay, don't run away from it, don't fight it, just observe it. And then ask the next question, well, what is it then that makes me truly unique?